I'll let you get over here a little bit.
Okay.
Instead of always on the side here. Rosa? Well, good afternoon.
Hi, John.
Right, Gelly, how are you?
Nice seeing you again.
Yeah, I guess we just saw each other up here at where was that at?
At New Glarus at the hotel.
And you're quite a polka.
Well, we really enjoy it. We really enjoy polka dancing, and we try to get out as often as we can and do a little dancing.
With some fancy steps that you got. It took you many years, maybe, huh?
Well, I had a daughter that was really, really interested in polka, and so I taught her as much as I could, and then we'd go up to Theresa, Wisconsin, maybe one night a month, and we'd learn a new step. And we'd work on that for a month, maybe, or 2 months, and we'd go back up again and learn another step. And eventually, her and I ended up going to the National Polka Championship in Chicago.
Is that right?
And we didn't do real good. We got 6th place in it, but we had a good time.
Well, that sounds pretty good. Well, Bob, if I may say, this polka has been a big thing with the Swiss and the immigrants through here. They brought it over here from their country, and now there's a lot of Bohemian and Polish and Slovenian, and it has got to be quite a deal, right?
Really, well, we like Slovenian polka. It's a little bit faster polka. It's like Frank Yankovic and of course Roger Bright, and we really like Slovenian polka. It's popular in Ohio especially, and it's popular in a lot of areas. And it's just a little bit faster polka than the German or the Umpapa, as we call it. But we enjoy it all.
Well, we're at Turner Hall here, and this is May 2nd, and Bob Gerber, May 2nd, 1995, and I think you know me, John Boozman.
Oh, yes.
For many years, and the reason I had you come, because I'd like to have you kind of tell us about the involvement of the cooling of the milk for many years, how it has changed in your time and period, and you sold a lot of milk coolers, and maybe you can kind of tell us a few things about how it started, how it was when you first had the cooling of the milk, and we'll go from there.
Well, I appreciate you having me down here, and I guess I'd start out by saying I started hauling milk in December of 1949, and at that time they were cooling milk in outside cow tanks, and a few of them had milk houses, but they didn't milk very much in the winter. And so with me starting out in December, I almost starved to death because maybe one farmer would have a can and a half, and another one would have maybe 2 cans, and the water would cool the milk and then it'd freeze, and you have to chop the cans out of the water. And we really had a rough time hauling the milk. And then,
excuse me. Well, I think it was a trend of the farmers. They didn't want to milk in the winter. And I remember some of these cheese dealers said they didn't have any cheese, and they had quite a time convincing that farmer that instead of cutting wood in the wintertime, which he liked to cut the wood and quit milking, and of course the roads became to where you had snow plows and before, and it was a transition to try to get that farmer to milk in the wintertime here.
well, I think that the thing that really helped it a lot is when grade A came in, and they started taking grade A milk, and then they paid a premium then for having year-round milk. Where in the cheese factories, I kind of think they liked having taken it easy in the winter.
Sure,
and of course,
cheesemaker's ball.
well, and I think the biggest thing was that they could turn the cows out on grass in the spring and really, really utilize the alfalfa and the pasture. And for the farmers, and then also the cheesemakers, of course, got more milk.
Well, then the hay balers came in, where they could make the hay, and they could feed it a little different than from the loose hay in the barn. And then the feed mills came and transportation, and the roads became more passable, whereas years ago, you know, when they got clogged up, you couldn't get through for 2-3 days in these country roads.
Well, a lot of times in the winter, we might pick their milk up in 3-4 days, and sometimes the farmer would have to bring the cans out to the road with a sled, in order for us to pick it up. But then as it advanced, then of course the farmers started getting milk houses, and they started getting can coolers, and they were getting away from the freezing of the milk, and they were getting a better quality of milk. And then, as I was saying, then when grade A came in, and they really enticed the farmer to milk more year round, so that there was more milk in the winter. Of course, that was a lot better for us milk holders.
All right, and then you went into, how did you get involved in the sales of milk cooling then?
Well, then in about in the middle 50s, then grade A was all bulk. And so then I hauled to a milk plant up in Mount Horeb, Reiser Brothers, and they decided to go bulk. So we had a meeting with the farmers, and they were all for it. And then at that time, then I was hauling to Reiser Brothers, and they paid the farmers a 20-cent premium for having bulk milk. So I had 6 trucks at that time, but I only needed two tanks.
6 trucks?
6 milk trucks for cans. So then I thought, well, I'll sell coolers to my patrons to help pay for the tanks. And I was just thinking about this, and then a fellow by the name of Arnold Tooley, and I think everybody knows him from Dodgeville, told me, well, I've got a fellow wanting me to sell Mueller bulk milk coolers that are made down in Springfield, Missouri. So I called them and talked to them, and I got the dealership on the cooler, and that's kind of how it started.
You know, I remember one thing, you know, and I never could figure this out, but I know how they enticed someone to go grade A. They said, well, if you take that milk cooler, you get a better test. Well, I never figured out how that milk cooler could put fat in the milk.
Well, there was a lot of sales pitches to sell the farmer the milk cooler, because it's hard to change. You know, it's hard to change from one factory to another, or hard to change your cooling, because it was a expensive thing at $2,000. But what helped us was PCA Production Credit Association came in, and they financed these with no money down, and this 20-cent premium I was talking about would pay for it. And then it was easier to sell the farmer. But as far as butterfat goes, our sales pitch on that was that we can hold your milk below 50 or blend temperature at all times with this system of cooling, and therefore your butterfat is going to stay better. Plus, instead of milk sticking to your cans, you know, and going down the drain through the can washer, with the bulk milk cooler, your milk is measured in that cooler, so you have no stickage at all.
And you could see him measure it, and the farmer could measure it himself.
Right.
And then I know one thing, you know, a fellow said to me, he says, you know, you watch John now. He says, but you'll have 1 or 2 or 3 farmers, and this farmer says, I'll quit milking before I'll buy a cooler.
Right.
But after about 3-4 neighbors go,
yeah,
he had to keep up with the neighbors,
yeah,
right?
True. And if you could get in one area and just sell one cooler, and pretty soon another one, and then it just came easier. But getting back to the stickage, I had one fellow that I'd sold a cooler to, and my thing was, now you're going to get more milk because it won't stick to the sides of your cooler. And this fellow's name was Joel Leonard from Hollandale, and he's passed away since. But anyway, I told Joel about this. I'll stick them to your cooler, and you're going to get more milk. So he bought one and put it in. And I went back a couple weeks later to see how it was going, and he says, you told me that I would get more milk by putting in this milk cooler because of the stickage and all that stuff. I'm getting less. And I said, Joe, I don't understand that. I don't know. He said, I'm getting less milk. I said, well, what happened, Joe? Well, he says, I can't remember the number. I think it was 10 kids or 9 kids. And my kids like that milk so good, they're all drinking twice as much. But on the other hand, he liked his cooler, and down the road we sold a little bigger one.
I have to tell you this in my experience when we record this. I remember when I was a young boy, I didn't like milk because they always brought milk into the house in a pitcher, which was open, and always got that scum or cream. That cream kind of separated and became in chunks, And then when these milk coolers came, and of course it seemed like it took the alfalfa smell and some of the smell out. It seemed like that aeration somehow, or whatever it is.
The stirring.
The stirring, and is that
because you could smell it. You could smell it come out when you put in your first milking, because then your milk would be 80 or 90 degrees. But then when you put in your second milking, then it would never go over 50, and that's holding your blend temperature.
All right. Well, maybe you can tell us, Bob, some of the first coolers, what they were like, maybe, and how it evolved, and what we have from those days up till today.
Well, the first coolers that came out had a small cooling plate, and then they had an ice bank cooler. An ice bank cooler is set up so that you freeze ice water, and therefore you could use a smaller compressor, and then you use the ice water spraying against your tank to cool your milk. Now, the direct expansion then is a coil that's underneath the stainless steel tank, and it cools it direct. And the argument there was that don't buy a direct expansion because it'll freeze the milk and hurt your test. And that's where the ice bank people says with ice bank now, you don't have ice or actual freezing on the bottom with ice water because there's no ice there. Well, eventually the direct expansion won out, and of course today everything is direct expansion. But an ice bank really took up more room. It was more cumbersome with having the ice, and anyway, I won't go into the arguments that we had both ways. But anyway, the direct
there
expansion.
There was quite an argument there.
There really was.
When the salesmen came and they said, "Well, God," since electricity goes off, you still got the ice, and then some of these coolers would freeze up, right? They would freeze the milk, or you get butter. Shall we say butter clumps, or what caused that?
Well, see, if you had a direct expansion, the coils come up part way on the side of the tank, and maybe your first milking you didn't come above those coils. Then you would have freezing around those coils.
And that'd give you your butter globules, or sometimes the butter, which naturally really hurt the test because they couldn't get any.
Well, unless they got one of the butter chunks of the tester.
Right. All right. So then your first coolers, what size were they then?
I would say the average cooler then was probably 180 to 250 gallon. And there was a lot of different makes. There was your Dairy Cool and your Mueller or MD and
go ahead.
And De La Valle or Creamery Package. Creamery Package and De La Valle had one with the unit right on the cooler, and the door open from the side, leaving the complete cooler open. And their sales pitch on that was that it's much easier cooling, because on the other coolers you have a bridge in the middle that holds your agitator,
right? And
then you had to wash under that bridge. Okay, then there was a Grown cooler that was a round cooler like a dish with a top on it, and the whole top opened up. And their big sales pitch was, now, if your wife or your mother went out to buy a bowl for stirring anything up, would they buy a square one? And so that was their sales pitch, that they'd buy a round cooler because that's what stirs the best.
One fellow told me, he says, these milk coolers are all right, but he says, you can't take the place of them can coolers, because I could put my beer in there. I always had beer in the can cooler. He couldn't put his beer cans in the water. The can, maybe explain that, what I'm trying to say here. The can cooler sprayed the water up on the cans, and you could put the beer right in there, which wasn't in the milk.
Right in the water part.
Right in
yeah.
the water part.
You
And
could,
you
really.
could get fresh cold beer year round.
Well, one of the biggest complaint that I had in that regard was that the farmer would come and say, well, I can't get cream anymore for my cereal in the morning. Because on a milk cooler, you just had a very, very thin cream on top, where in a milk can, you probably had that much cream, and it was easier to skim off.
Well, this test was a very important thing, to the farmer, because he got paid on what percent fat he had in his milk. And of course, if the milk hauler came in and just dipped in there right away, can you explain what I'm talking about there? Where you didn't leave it stir long enough?
Well, the milk hauler, in his test to be a milk hauler, he had to be licensed. He had to let that milk stir out, I believe it was for a minute and a half.
And some places even said 3 minutes.
Maybe it was 3 minutes. Maybe, yeah.
Well, the more the better.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he could reach down there with that sampler and just come up with skim milk, right? And that's good.
But they were in a hurry. They had long routes to do, and maybe sometimes they skimped a little bit on the time. I don't know, but in general, the farmer was watching.
And it was quite a thing, because that milk hauler, he became the intake man. He was the man that met with the farmer. He was the go-between. He was the fellow that picked his milk up. And it was the personality between them. And the timing he came and took the test and read the weight. He was really a very important man at that time.
Well, then he was really the only man that talked to the farmer. He was kind of the go-between between the factory and the farmer. Where before when the farmer hauled his own milk, of course he'd go to the factory, talk to the cheesemaker or what have you, where they didn't have that anymore.
All right, now you started out with about what size coolers would you say? How much did they hold, these small ones when they first started out?
Probably 1,500 pounds.
1,500 pounds. And then eventually they went to, did you have much trouble with cooling then, when they start milking more and picking up every day? And
Well, really no problem with cooling, but what happened then, milking machines advanced, and then the farmers started milking faster. Well, then these smaller coils wouldn't hold that blend temperature, and the minute you're done, most of them are on every other day pickup, so that they had 4 milkings in there. Well, the first milking would be all right, but the second milking, if your blend temperature of 50 degrees would climb above 50 and get into 55 and 60, it really hurt your test and hurt the quality of the milk. So then what happened, the cooler companies had to make a larger plate. And of course, at the same time, the farmers were expanding their herds so that they went from this 150 gallon cooler to maybe a 300, 400, 500, what have you. And then they started getting a premium if they could hold every other day milk. And so then it came to a bigger cooler yet. Well, then they pretty soon they were running out of room for their milk houses. And so the milk cooler companies, 1 or 2 of them, came out with what they called a bulkhead tank. I think you had some of
yes,
those.
yeah.
To where half the tank stuck outside, and then the front of the tank stuck inside. And this worked out real good.
And the reason for that every other day pickup was you could keep the milk, and the trucker didn't have to go down that same road every day, whereas he could save in transportation, which was, say, 20 cents a hundred they got back at that time, which was almost saving half of it, right? Then there'd be always one farmer down there wanted to pick it up every day, and you had the rest of them on every other day, and you had to convince him that, look, he needs a bigger tank, and he said, no, if you want my milk, you come and pick it up anyhow. You
Yeah.
run into a lot of that, right?
Right, and when I was putting in for my own customers and putting in the coolers, I had one fella that bought a 180 gallon cooler, and I wanted everybody every other day. And he says, I won't do it. If you don't put me in every other day, then I'll quit. So then he bought this 180 gallon cooler, and I told him I couldn't haul his milk because it was too far out of the way, and he really got angry. But it was, we pushed that, and we had every other day milk.
And what would you say is probably the largest cooler that you had here?
I think the largest one we put in is 3,000 gallon.
And that's 3 times 8?
about 25,000 pounds.
25,000 pounds. Now, John was just saying here a little while ago, he said he got a lot of milk that day. He said, he got up to 7,000 pounds. That was and like a two-wheel Swiss cheese factory was like 4,000 pounds for the whole factory.
Right.
And here you got one farmer with 25,000. It sure has changed, hasn't it?
Well, when you were talking to John there, and you asked him, about when did cream go bulk? Well, then we started putting in cream coolers, and we used a regular milk cooler, but with a smaller plate for cream coolers, and because they only pick that cream up maybe sometimes once a week. And we put in a lot of coolers for Lower Valley Dairy out of West Bend. We put them clear out in Nebraska, down Ohio, all over the central United States.
Then what did you do with your old coolers? What did you do with all these small ones?
Well, then, we must have had an acre of small coolers, and we were wondering, what are we going to do with these? But anyway, then Madison started the Dairy Expo. And we set up new coolers at the Dairy Expo to sell new coolers. And one day, a fellow came by from Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, Dr. Brachian, asked me about used coolers. And so he came out and looked at them. And there, they will put in a cooler where there's electricity. And so they didn't care about the size plate, because they pick their milk up twice a week. Twice a week instead of every other day or every day. And so we shipped him these coolers by Sealand container by the semi-load.
Is that right?
And then pretty soon they got electricity on these little farms, and then we had a market for our real small coolers. And we did the same thing in Mexico. We did the same thing up in Quebec. And I figured that we shipped out about 600 coolers like that.
Exported.
Exported.
To different areas.
Right.
How interesting.
But they could use the obsolete cooler because they weren't milking that fast.
Did they find any other uses for them?
Well, they use them for honey. I don't know just how they use them, but Honey Boy Farms bought a lot of them from us. The older coolers, they didn't use the cooling part of it. I think what they did is they used the coils and heated with hot water. And then, some of the farmers still got whey, and they put the tanks down for whey, hauling whey, or holding whey for the hogs. And that was about it.
Interviewing, I just can't help but add this when I'm thinking about it. We sure came a long way. They were talking where they captured, they were dumping the can of milk and a little fish came out of it. But he kept it in the spring,
Right.
And I remember even back when I was in, one day set it in the creek, They didn't have it, when the windmill didn't wind, I always say that, I had to put it in the creek, and maybe they only had a quarter of a can. Well, that would half float. Isn't that a fish would ever jump in a can? But I'm sure the can tipped over. And of course,
Well,
got a fish in it, and then of course when it came to the end, he said it couldn't be in his creek.
I always talk about the farmer hauling his milk in with a team of horses, and he'd always stop at the creek every day and rest the horses. One day he'd come in and he had a fish in his milk. So I guess
Maybe he was watering it. Well, yeah, it was. Well, I'm going to take a little break here, and then we'll come back to you. Okay?
Okay.
Right, now, where are we going to we end up here? We're going to start with, let's stay right on the coolers. And what did you say about hauling cheese? Then I'll ask you to say, Bob, I needed a little break there. Golly, it was.
I appreciated that. That was all right for me.
Well, it seemed to make quite a difference too, because I was familiar with the can washers and the cans, and those old can washers didn't clean too good either. And I used to, as a young boy, have to clean those cans every Saturday and Sunday. And then this bulk cooler came along, and I thought, well, my God, how nice it is. Well, did the woman wash it, or how did that? Who was the new thing? Because a lot of these farmers, they really weren't good housekeepers. They were field men, and some of them had wives that says they would come out and wash, and the other one says, "Look, I'm staying in the house."
Well, it got to the point where every factory had to have a can washer, because one started, another one started, and then it got more competitive, and they just had to have a can washer. Not only that, but they had a better quality of milk then. And talking about can washer reminds me of when this factory that I hauled to went 100% bulk. And I happened to haul the last load of canned milk into that factory. And so the fellow that was dumping the milk, he had a long track, his name was Otto. And so I set the last can on the what do you call it?
And they enter on the.
That rolls the cans in. I set the last can in there, and I says to Otto, look out. I took my foot and I shoved it. Over it went, milk all over in there. That was the end of our cans.
Oh, good. That was just.
It was kind of different.
Just like baptizing a ship, you know,
Something,
right?
yeah.
You give it a kick instead of taking the whole bottle and cracking it across the hull.
But anyway, I was going to get into the cheese hauling that we used to do, and like when we had the canned trucks, then we had to have the milk in by noon because of the cooling. You know, you couldn't hold your blend temperature, and the milk had to be in by noon. So in the afternoon, then we started hauling cheese, and we bought out a couple little companies that hauled cheese. We started hauling cheese here to Monroe, to Triangle Cheese Company and Borden's, and later on Monroe Cheese Company, and I'm sure you could name a lot more of them. Then there was Hensley Cheese Company in Mount Horeb, who bought some cheese like from New Glarus and various little factories in that area, and we'd haul it back up there. And so in that way, we kept our trucks running, and that worked out real good. And so that's how we got into the cheese hauling.
In the cheese hall. And then back to the bulk cooler now, towards the end when they got these big, large 25,000-pound coolers, you know, nobody crawled in there and washed them, right? How did you?
Well, then the Zero milk cooler came out with an automatic washer that was on the paddle of their cooler, and this paddle I think would spin backwards and would pick up the water in the bottom and spray the water inside the cooler and wash it. Well, then they had a patent on it, so nobody else could do it. So Mueller made a washer that slipped in the valve end of the cooler.
At the bottom there, where the milk would drain out.
Right, and then it had a motor on it, and it hooked into a control panel on the wall that would wash the cooler. And then several companies came out with washers so that the coolers would be washed automatic. And then it got to where there was the milk had to be carried. They couldn't have their cans in the barn anymore and dump the milk in the barn. The milk had to be carried from behind the cow or from the pail that the milk were dumped into to the milk house. Well, then somebody came up with the idea of having a transfer station. This transfer station was like a pail with a hole in the bottom with a 5/8 hose that run all the way from the driveway of the barn into the milk house.
So as the farmer milked these cows, he would dump his milk unit, the surge milker or whatever milker he had, right into this transfer station, right?
And had to take the milk into the milk cooler. Then when he was done, he'd roll it up, roll the hose up on a rack on the container, and then it would self-wash. Well, then from there,
Now, Bob, what did the cats do with all this modernization? You know, I mean, years ago, they always used to have 14, 16 cats in the barn, and when you set the pail down there, you went shooing flies, but the cats got there licking too, and you didn't dare to chase. You had to feed them anyhow. But,
I don't know what they did, but they all stayed in pretty good shape. So
took the milk from the fresh cow, the cow that just
Probably,
fresh
yeah.
that they couldn't use, and fed it to the cats. Because a cat was a big thing to keep the mice from the.
Oh yeah, and they all had cats. But then we went. I shouldn't say we, but then the producers or the farmer went to the permanent pipeline, which was much more expensive, and they went to a permanent glass line that was mounted on top of the stanchions and would go into the milk house. And then they plugged their milker right into this glass line.
So you didn't even have to have a milk pail, that just
No.
put this little unit on underneath there and put it on the udder or the tits, or
Yeah.
teats as they call it.
Yeah.
Tits is spelled T-E-A-T-S,
Right.
but I never hear anybody say teats. It's
Right.
just tits.
Right.
And went from right there to the pipeline.
Right. So then down the road, they had a little trouble with breaking of glass. And then stainless steel come up with a weld that would pass inspection. And so then they started putting in stainless steel lines, and they were much more efficient, you
clean
might
for
say,
cleaning.
easier cleaning. But then the first thing you know, the farmers were milking faster yet. And then they were flooding these lines, and they would flood back through their cloths and cause mastitis. So then the first thing you know, instead of having an 1.5 inch stainless steel line, then you had to go to a 2 inch and then to a 3 inch. And I don't know how it is today, but it does take bigger lines. They naturally want to get done milking faster, and of course, in so doing, it takes better cooling, it takes a bigger pipeline, it takes a bigger vacuum pump. And
Yeah, it takes the whole cycle to
Right.
finish on. When
Right.
you start something, like the old farmer said to me, he said, just got a new tractor. Oh, God, for plowing. Well, then he hooked it on the chopper. Well, it just blew it apart. So he had to get a new chopper. Well, then it was too fast for the wagons, so he had to buy the wagons.
Right.
And then after the wagons, the unit that blows it up into the silo was big enough.
Right.
It's the whole cycle. Very interesting. And I guess that's just about it. And I still admire you poking, up there.
I appreciate that.
And
We enjoy it.
It's very, very interesting what they're doing with milk today. And I understand they get as high as 5,000 cows in some of these places. And the unit, I'm sure you're familiar with it too. You know, it's kind of amazing to me. You know, years ago, that old cow that usually sometimes didn't milk all the way out on the front teat, if I may use it, it would still suck that vacuum and it would injure the tit.
Right.
So today they got this computer, so the minute the milk quits squirting, it just drops off, and one farmer or one person can milk as high as 10, 12 cows and take care of it. You know, in these carousel.
Right. All I do is put them on.
Just put them on, and it's what science can do today.
But I'd like to say this, that I really enjoy dealing with farmers. You know, farmers are honest, really, and I'm not just saying that because I was in the business, but something that I say is, sure, they run short of money once in a while, and I've had it happen, and a farmer would say to me, well, I'll catch you now next month. And he was there. So anyway, in 1980, when I sold out, then I have a mobile home park as a retirement fund and started running this park myself and started dealing with city people, and I really, really got an education. And again, I'd like to say,
I'm going to make a statement here, Bob, as long as you brought it up. I think with these small farmers going, one of the things that agriculture has contributed to our country is the youth, the background, which this is the Midwest, and the cultures that they grew up with, and that it seems like in the cities you lose. Not saying that we don't have a lot of good people or whatever it is, or are, but it's harder to maintain, whereas this farm boy came out of here and he ended up being Congress and our cultures, and that this old-time down-to-earth culture is leaving us. Well, it's been a nice visiting here with you, and we hope that Historic Monroe will appreciate 100 years from now and what we've discussed.
well, you never know. I enjoyed being here, I really did. Thanks,
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Bet. I'm Tom.